20 fastest growing economies will be in Africa with a GDP growth projection of 3.8% in 2024 and 4.2% in 2025. That's according to the African Development Bank, saying that Africa will have 11 of the world's 20 fastest growing economies in the world. I don't know if I can see Nigeria. Of course, Nigeria is not there. Are we there? We're not there. We're still struggling with a 3% growth. All right, the European Union, through its ambassador to Nigeria, Samuela Isopi, has disclosed its plans to invest 37 million euros in Nigeria's power sector. How that will be, we will definitely be putting our ears to the ground to check out the details. Now, let's take a quick look at the markets. Last week, the NGX ended positively, up by 379 basis points to settle at 105,722.78 points in the money market. Ample liquidity was maintained due to CBN reforms, while the Treasury bills market experienced some mixed sentiments last week, with closing yields at 15.72%. The FGM bonds market remained bearish due to plans to offer a Naira bond auction. The FGM Euro bonds market was bullish last week, leading to cautious market behavior, while the Naira fell to 1,537 Naira 96 kobo to $1 at the autonomous market. That's the foreign exchange market. If we move over to the foreign scene, U.S. stocks declined last Friday following an inflation report that heightened concerns on potential Federal Reserve rate hikes. The U.S. markets are on holiday today, of course, when there will be no trading today due to the President's Day holiday. But in Europe, markets started the week this morning negatively after showing mostly positive sentiments last week. For the Chinese markets, we saw the Chinese market rising, precisely also Asian Pacific markets rising after a long lunar holiday. Of course, the Chinese market was on holiday last week due to the lunar holiday. This year is known as the Year of the Dragon. If we move over to oil prices, we are seeing that Brent crude is falling to $82.89 a barrel in nearly trade, while gold prices are rising on a soft dollar. Lithuania's Foreign Minister Gabrielius Landsbergis has called for increased NATO spending, warning that former U.S. President Donald Trump's comments were an indication that Europe must do more.
Lithuania, this year we're reaching 2.77% of our GDP towards we're spending to defense. We currently have a debate in Lithuania whether we should go even beyond that. These sort of messages do ring a bell in the United States, but also in Germany. You know, we're grateful for German government that made the decision to station a brigade in Lithuania. But you know, we want to make sure that government in Germany, that administration in the United States, that they would know that whatever they are helping, that whatever they are doing to help Lithuania, we're doing our part as well. We're not.
Nigerians have continued to decry the low purchasing power of the Naira, and recent reports indicates that the persistent slide and the Naira contributes to rising inflation, causing a decline in the standard of living of Nigerians. Speaking with Moneyline with Nancy's crew, Abuja residents earlier views on ways to rescue the Naira.
We need to borrow ideas from experts. It's a question of idea. So our attitude towards the economic approach to things, especially to dollar, you know, is not good locally. You know, locally we should, you know, look at things we produce among ourselves and bring them down to our standard without checking what the international currencies is costing about.
We find ourselves in this kind of situation, and this situation is so pathetic that common man finds it so difficult to even feed themselves 3 meals a day. Yeah, it's so pathetic. Yeah, and I believe we just pray God have mercy upon us and see us through in this situation we find ourselves. Seriously, the people are really suffering here, and the hardship is terrible. And I pray the government comes into the hands of the less privileged, more especially the children, who do not even have means of livelihood. If you are producing shoe, and because of the low quality of it, that's why I cannot patronize the shoe. Why not? Let's bring expatriates that can produce and let them inculcate those discipline or those kind of techniques, so that the Nigerians can also learn from that and they can also produce. But in a situation whereby I am consuming your good from outside and my own shoe, the local shoes are not they are not being consumed. They are not being. You cannot go and buy them. So what? How did you expect your dollars, your naira to be good? You don't expect them. You don't expect your currency to be good.
It bites harder on the manufacturing sectors more than any other sectors. And that is why you see some other businesses that are winding up. Because for them to get their raw materials probably from the abroad, they need dollars to get it. There's no two way. It's either you get dollar or you don't get it. So if you get the dollar, you know what it is to get. And the situation is that the demand exceeds supply in the market, in the forex market.
The effort by the federal government to remove the subsidy on fuel is contributing towards a more positive outcome. In the short term, it is painful. There's absolutely no question about it, but it will definitely yield its dividends. You've got to move as a country beyond being a consumer nation. And it is something that we as Nigerians have been talking about for so long, for so many years, for decades, but really we've not been able to actualize that. So that's something very important that has dogged the economy of the country over a period of time.
Nigeria's multifaceted food insecurity crisis is presently putting an estimated 25 million people in danger, and this precarious situation is a result of volatile convergence of socio-political, climatic, economic and infrastructure factors. Food prices are skyrocketing due to economic instability, which is demonstrated by an inflation rate of over 29% as of January this year, according to the NBS. Meanwhile, the majority of Nigerians struggle with stagnating wages, making basic food items unaffordable for millions of Nigerians. The number of people in the country who are caught in the vicious cycle of food insecurity is rising. What is the FG as well as the states government doing about this dangerous situation? The initiatives enough. My guests are with me right here, and let's delve right in. Aminu Murtala Nyako is the Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer at Sebore International Firms. Welcome to the program.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good to see you again. While we have Wilson Nerumebo, he is the Senior Economist at the NESG. He joins us from London. Hello, Wilson. Good to see you too.
Same here, Nancy.
All right, let's start. And let me start from the economic side, Aminu, but let me start with Wilson. Wilson, is this a perfect storm? The African Development Bank has said that if this is not managed well, it will lead to social unrest in the country, and we've seen that in the past few days. So how perfect is this storm?
Well, it's something of, grave concern. You know how food is, like we would say, it's when you've eaten that you can think of, doing other things. And so, we've had a case where in the last 13 months, so inflation at 29.9%, that's 13 months consecutive increase. Just before that, especially if you go back to the border closure that we had in 2019, we had, a case where inflation increased 19 consecutive months. Before that, we had the recession in 2016 where inflation increased 15 consecutive months. So we're seeing a case where in the last 9 years, inflation has been a big problem for Nigeria, and Nigerians have been through tough times. And we all know what that means, especially with regards to if you compare with household income or whether it's wages or even investment on returns aspect, you would see that Nigerians have been worse off. The fact that prices are increasing and your income is not increasing as much as it should means that, people are falling into poverty. And my estimation is that by the time we reassess and even, try to compute poverty numbers for, say, 2023, we would see that it would far exceed that 133 million multidimensionally for Nigerians. So, yes, it is a storm, and the consequences, would be grave if nothing is done to change the tide as far as increases in prices are concerned.
Okay, let me come over to Aminu here, who is a farmer. You're into the agri space, the food space. In July of last year, President Bola Tinubu declared a state of emergency on food. From July to now, a few months have gone down the line, almost close to 1 year, whether about 3 months or 4 months shy of 1 year since he made that declaration. Yet we're still seeing that a lot of people are being plunged into hunger. The FAO has said that this year, that 26.5 million Nigerians will be plunged into hunger. What have you seen change from July of last year to the initiatives of the government, at least in the last few days, the talk about the silos, getting out for 2,000 metric tons from the grains reserve, as well as the meetings with the governors last week? Has anything significantly changed?
Well, thank you so much for having me. I would say things are moving in the right direction, albeit very slowly. The reason I say this is I think the President Asiwaju Bola Ahmed Tinubu's administration has started to realize the magnanimity of the problem that Nigeria is facing in terms of its food crisis. As I mentioned earlier before, you see, we're a very large nation, and to think that you can very quickly start to adjust or restructure the economy of the country in such a fundamental way in such a short period is not also quite easy. You need to actually have all your tools, all your players, and all your resources to bear to be able to start to change things in the right direction. I think when he declared the state of emergency, I think people need to realize that everybody saw a food crisis coming. As at the last time I was here, we kind of also mentioned that, look, all countries in the world globally are facing very similar challenges. However, Nigeria is in such a precarious position because we have not made investments. Investments are current spending for future gains. Over the last decade, 15 years, Nigeria has not been making the requisite investment in its agricultural space and other spaces to be able to forestall what we are currently facing here today. And it's quite unfortunate that at the beginning of 2024, we're now seeing how visceral inflation can be for the nation's people. You need to realize that as at right now, there's no bailout. There is no way, if anybody tells you debt can save our situation, they're lying. The reason being, the UK has gone into recession. Ireland has come and saved us or bail us out. That's not there. Aid cannot do this. I think right now, Nigerians need to kind of understand fundamentally that we have always been a nation of potential, and we have to convert this potential into meaningful things. We need to start creating opportunities for them to actually earn a living, a living wage per se. And we've been doing this over 3 years. The insecurity in the Northeast is maybe 15 years old. So a lot of the disinvestment, displacement of farmers and things, people in the Northeast have experienced it before. Over the last 5 years, there was bandits in the Northwest and other places. So the real true thing right now that we need to target is that Nigeria has to look that fundamentally we are facing a trifecta of things. And I don't think leadership right now is articulating it the way it should. we're experiencing falling GDP. We're experiencing food inflation, and we're experiencing a devaluation. In an economic sense, these are trifecta of forces that
changes to it.
So I'll start with your second question. We are not producing enough food.
Okay.
And that in itself is not bad. But it is damning because of the nature of which Nigeria has been conducting business. In the 1960s, just to give you context, the entire world moved into a globalized system of trade, where you produce for the world and the world produces for you. And within that context, Nigeria has always been focused on producing for itself. Unfortunately for us, in the 60s, we were about 45 million people. Now we're 220 million people, still producing the same numbers that we thought were going to feed the entire nation. What we need to do right now, like I was at the summit and I said, look, Nigeria is experiencing a paradigm shift in what our economy looks like. And we need thinkers, we need doers, and we need people that have the belief of Nigeria to actually step forward. What I mean by this is, in the international stage, where you look at in terms of agriculture, are different categories. You look at fruits and vegetables, you look at staple foods, you look at cash crops, and you look at tree crops. If you do not look at it within this context, Nigeria is blessed across this concept, but every time we hear of interventions by either aid agencies, government, you're always thinking about staple food, which is rice. Each one of these categories that I've laid out to you have different strategies by which you can achieve its end state. Fruits and vegetables, Nigeria's produce a lot. We know of the mango belt in Benue. We know about oranges, pineapples, mangoes. We have all of this, but the solutioning for each of these categories the street. My dad is Babame Mango, so economic crops. Yeah. What you need to do is build out a strategy. If you focus only on food crops such as rice, beans, and the rest, you can only take full advantage of it if you produce in excess. Right now, I do not even believe that with 220 million Nigerians eating rice every day, Nigeria can rejig its rice production quickly enough to say you're going to feed everybody. So you need some form of import to help substitute the demand, because we eat rice every day. But we do not eat shea butter every day. We do not eat ginger every day. These are cash crops that you can send out that gives you export credits that allow you to then cushion the effect of food crops to your nation. Nigeria is large, so your solution has to be larger, because if you in a sense, water down your vision to a couple of food crops, there is no way our diet right now will be able to be fulfilled. Nigeria is a young population. A young population needs protein. Proteins comes from eggs. Egg is 300 naira now, from 50 naira. These things are unheard of. You need milk. You need meat. These things are things that you must build out a completely concrete strategy for all these things. What are the things that Nigeria is going to export to get export credits? What are the things that we're going to incentivize internally to produce? And if you're able to pull out these strategies, I'm very glad that the meeting last week happened, because some of these things are starting to be articulated alongside the Governors Forum led by His Excellency Abdurrahman Abdurazak. People have started seeing it, but to be honest with you, because the global economy is coming to a slowdown, there is no savior from outside.
Okay, let me come back to Wilson. You've heard all that Aminu has said, at least from the lenses of a farmer. He says we do not produce enough food. He actually did say that we're in a trilemma earlier: devaluation, inflation, and a food inflation. How important is it for this administration to get the macros right? Because if you see, like from what he said, there's been food insecurity in the north in the past 15 years, and we did not deal with it. Farmers have been paying harvest allowance to bandits. It's still ongoing. Farmers are being killed. They can't go back to their farms. Then cascade it into the economic crisis which we find ourselves. So how important is it for the fiscal authority to get the macro on track?
Oh, yeah, the macro is everything, because if you do not have that macroeconomic stability, in fact, it's almost like a precondition for the kind of, growth and expansion that we need, and the kind of production that can, say we can increase local production and even export more to other countries. All of this cannot happen if you keep having this sort of distortions and macroeconomic instability. So take FX, for instance. We can see how, the rate has depreciated.
With Global, you order anything you want, and when you receive it, you celebrate it dancing. Order Global and we'll deliver in minutes.
Take FX, for instance. We can see how, the rate has depreciated over time. And in fact, what we see now, within the manufacturing sector, which is also important as far as food is concerned, is that, we've always argued that Nigeria is an import-dependent economy, right? But what you then see within manufacturing is that Nigeria has an import-dependent manufacturing industry. So when you look at some of the big players within the manufacturing industry, for instance, you will see that most of their inputs are imported. Just go through the books of maybe Nestle, Unilever, and some of these big players. You would see that in some cases over about 58% of, services materials are imported. You move to Unilever, something close to 65% or thereabout. So that in itself means that these businesses are heavily exposed to currency depreciation. They're also exposed to, issues relating to the supply chain, the global supply chain. Whatever happens right now, we're talking about the Red Sea. Cocoa prices have gone to, over $5,000 per ton. All of the issues we're seeing in the Red Sea. So it means that if you don't even produce, and by produce, I'm not even talking about finished goods itself. I'm talking about raw materials, goods that you would then need to produce other goods. Then you are, in a severe problem, especially because we've not had that stability in the last 8 years. We've had, series of, whether it's devaluation or depreciation. The other thing is that, so when you look at some of these firms, you would see that, for instance, things like wheat, sugar, industrial starch, are heavily imported into the country. And, I was speaking to a few manufacturers in November, last year, back in Nigeria. And some of the things that came up were that, look, they can't even, produce as much as they want because of these problems of, effects that they have. And you would see that, just take an example with, say, cassava, for instance. Industrial starch is one of the things that, many of these businesses need, as a byproduct of cassava. The demand for that is almost about, you see estimate, at about 600,000 metric tons. Nigeria is the largest cassava producer in the world. But again, that industrial starch, over, 40% of it is imported. So the question is, what stops us, from being able to process that cassava itself, to produce this industrial starch that is in heavy demand, and the demand is even forecasted to keep rising over time. So it means that we are not even, as far as if we look at the value chain of many of the agricultural products, or even within the manufacturing sector, you see that we are not tapping enough of those value chain. And that's part of why you see manufacturing is still 9% of our real GDP. It doesn't employ as much people because a lot of it has to do with importation of raw materials. And then that means businesses therefore are exposed to all of this macro instability, whether we talk about exchange rates and high inflation.
Okay.
To conclude, I would say that, so when you look at what we trade in, you talked earlier about exports and imports. You would see that Nigeria is a net importer of agricultural products. We're a net importer of raw materials. We're a net importer of manufactured products. And these are, if you then look at data from the NBS, collectively we're looking at an 11 trillion gap between import and export. So imports of these three areas, agricultural, raw materials, and manufactured goods. If you do the import minus export, you see that import is higher than export by 11 trillion. So my question is, my thesis is that we're not even producing enough for local production. How much more for exports? And the data shows it that manufacturing as a share of our exports is just 2%, of what 2% of what we export are manufactured goods. I don't think any country, can make significant progress with that.
Wilson, let me stick with you a bit. What will be your recommendation to get us out of this macroeconomic challenge where we're in now? Because you said at the beginning, when I asked you a question earlier, that macro is it, our macroeconomic fundamentals are it. How far are you seeing these initiatives from the government in terms of the fiscal policy? Cardoso is trying to do his on his side. There will be a monetary policy meeting next week to address inflation. I'm also wondering what you think about the stickiness of inflation and what that means for monetary policy meeting next week, Monday and Tuesday. The other part of the question which I want to ask you also is that of imports. The Minister of Agriculture has said that perhaps that there will be a closure of borders. They are proposing closed borders. And where my mind went to was 2019, what President Buhari did, and he closed the borders. And if you take a look at it historically, that actually also worsened our economic situation. But how would you also analyze that? Do we need imports at this time, despite the Minister of Information and National Orientation saying that, I think he said that a few days ago, that we are not going to look at food imports? What do you think? Should we import food? Looking at it now economically, no political, just thinking economic terms now. Should we import food so that the prices will crash?
One of the things I would say is, first of all, the things that we should not do. And I think closure of the land borders is something that we should not even think of doing. If at all we want to learn from what has happened in the past in 2019. When the borders were shut, like I mentioned at the start of the interview, inflation increased consecutively for 19 months, right? So why would we want to go back? And when you look at the gains, you can say we produced more rice, but even that rice is still being imported at the moment, right? When you then look at the quality, it's not as best as we would want that to be. So it then means that that's not actually what we should be doing. We should be thinking urgently to fix the value chain. We should be thinking of addressing insecurity. This should be like an existential threat to the country. We shouldn't be, trying to, call too many summits and meetings here and there. The problems are very well known to Nigerians. If there's no security at the farms, people will not go to the farms to make investments. So focus on that. Another thing we should not do, is to start locking up shops for hoarding and all of that. You are basically sending a signal that people should not make the necessary investment that they should. So those are the two things that I think we should avoid as much as possible. The other, you talked about monetary policy, monetary policy meeting coming up. And of course, inflation is one of the key, target for the central bank, as the governor has mentioned, and they will be moving into an inflation targeting regime. I honestly think that going forward, one of the key things that the central bank should do, it should stop any lending to the government. I'm not even talking about, I'm talking about ways and means. And I know the statutory limit is 5% of previous year's revenue. But I'm saying at this point, just put a pause on it. Let's stop it and let the government think of how else it can raise revenue. 10 years ago, Nigeria was producing 2.1 million barrels of crude. Now we are producing 1.3 million barrels, on the average. And you're telling me that we wouldn't have an exchange rate problem? We certainly would, because one of the major sources where we earn FX has dried up. So that in itself, shouldn't that qualify as an emergency for a country like Nigeria to address that and stop the theft? So let's not, because what happens is anytime revenue drops, the next thing is to run to the central bank. And there's no way you could have, injected 22.7 trillion naira ways and means into the economy within a very short time, and not expect inflation to keep increasing. Even though I still think that there are many other factors, like I've mentioned, insecurity, the border closure, and all of the supply chain bottlenecks, moving goods from one point to another, all of those checkpoints and co. Everything adds. But I think the central bank has its role to play. Stop any lending to the government at the moment, whether it's 5% or whether it's legitimate. Put a pause to that. If you then look at the data, what you find is that credit to the government and credit to the private sector, you would see that since 2018, credit to the government has grown faster than credit to the private sector. So we're talking about a growth rate of an average within 2018 and 2023. Credit to the government, has grown by 20% on average, by 47% on average, while credit to the private sector has grown by just 20%. So credit to the government has increased by almost like 12 times, from 2.9 trillion in 2015 to almost approaching 35 trillion. And then you can see that credit to the private sector is slowly growing. So an economy where lending is going more to the government, than to the private sector tells you something. It tells you that production is not happening. And that's where I then think that de-risking the value chain across many agricultural products is what we need to start, talking about at the moment. How can we start converting that cassava that we are, the world's largest producer of? How can we convert that into, sorbitol, industrial starch? And there is no shortcut to this. It's not something that would happen overnight. It's something that would require investment. We always think about long run is too long, but no, all of these problems could have been avoided if we had started doing the necessary things.
Okay.
So I should.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let me come back to Aminu. You've heard all that Wilson has said. We've not seen so much investment, of course, in the agri space and all of that. Let's decipher what the president mentioned, talking about the silos, getting out 42,000 metric tons of grains. The last time I checked, we still have 33 silos in the country with a capacity of 1.36 million metric tons. A few of the silos, or even more than half of them, have been concessioned to private sector owners. Aminu, what do you think? What do you think? Where are the grains that the president is talking about, Let's take.
I'm laughing, but to be honest with you, I think we need to, as a nation, understand the situation that we're in, and by so doing, it will allow us to be able to allocate resources most effectively. One thing you need to understand is that in any ship of state, the government has two ways of controlling those three things that I mentioned to you, which is your GDP, your inflation, and your FX. You have monetary policy and you have fiscal policy. Monetary policy is completely controlled by the central bank independently. However, monetary policy is a short-term thing. It can, once implemented, you should see the gains within 1 month to 2 months. Fiscal policy is what allows you to go 6 months, 12 months, 3 years, and longer. We have exhausted monetary policy. The CBN doesn't have the requisite interest rate tools right now to adjust inflation the way it would meaningfully impact the lives of Nigerians. And we have to come to that fact very quickly. We've been using monetary policy as a tool for the last decade, and we have exhausted the rope. Fiscal policy now has to be brought to bear. And when you're enacting fiscal policy in something such as agriculture or other sectors, then you need to have a short-term plan, a medium-term plan, and a long-term plan for you to achieve your goals. I'm speaking in this way because Nigerians have heard about problems, and you need to start thinking and speaking solution. In terms of what I'm trying to tell you now is that from my personal experience, before I started dairy, Nigeria was not even known as a dairy nation. But we decided that we have cows, we have the base, and we're going to integrate our farmers to give us milk. When we first started, we said, give us what you have. If it's 1 liter, if it's 5 liters, if it's 10 liters, give us, we will guarantee offtake to you What guaranteeing offtake does to a local farmer that is diligently taking care of his crops, toiling the land, giving his sweat, discounting it as labor, is that it tells him that whatever effort he puts to bear,
there's a reward.
there is a reward at the back end. No matter what, you're going to
de-risking the sector.
You're going to de-risk the sector. Once we did that, my God, Nancy, when we started in 2020, October 15th, the liter of milk we collected from these local pastoral farmers was 45 liters. As of yesterday, we're at 8,500 within the space of 18 months. We have communities begging us to bring infrastructure to their community because they have seen that what we said we were going to do, which is de-risk them, they are doing. I will tell you this, last year, as a litmus test for expansion of this model of de-risking local rural farmers, we told our farmers to do soya bean, to plant soya bean in the rainy season, and we would offtake every single soya bean that was harvested. About 78 communities did this, and we bought it from them. This gives you security that, look, even if I don't have fertilizer, I will plant. Whatever the soil gives me, I will sell. It gives them the confidence. Right now, our farmers are coming to ask us for AI. AI has been a policy of government for the last 20 years, begging farmers, we want to do AI. But because even if you do AI and you improve their cattle breed, and it gives you more milk, who is going to buy the milk?
Okay, so that brings me to the question of NICEL. I know you know NICEL.
Yes, I do.
The risk-sharing stuff that was done during Sanusi's time to de-risk the agricultural sector. And that office is still there now. It's meant to de-risk farmers.
To be honest with you, I think the current administration, Nigerians are well-meaning. I've had experience with Nigerians at all levels, from the rural farmers to middle management to civil servants to politicians in government. Everybody is well-meaning. And I think we've been attacking the problem that everybody has been seeing coming for the past decade in silos. NICEL was there. We had Anchor Grower Program. We have, most people don't know, under Smeden, we have OLOP, one local government, one product. We have all these interventions. We had the JEEP program under the social investment program that had farmer money, market money, trader money. And we had Agric. We've been trying to tackle these problems in silos, but because there is no Marshall Plan to say, look, within the categories of what Nigeria has been blessed by the Almighty to be able to produce, these are the ways you de-risk the farmers in different... Just to be clear, in the very short term, what we need to do is, for our local farmers, we have to de-risk by guaranteeing offtake. We have to start getting mega aggregators. The factory built by Sebore Farms is the largest of its kind in Nigeria. It's able to process 300,000 liters of milk daily. We built that factory so that we can guarantee that whatever milk comes about, we have the capacity to process it. There will not be wastage. We're having wastage in fruits, we're having wastage in tomato, we're having wastage in cassava. The amount of wastage in correlation to our food insecurity is maddening.
That was why I asked you earlier that question, if we produce enough food.
So you say
whether we produce enough food, but we waste a lot of them.
We waste a lot of food. And the issue is, I'll tell you, a farmer in Fufo, the local government, Adama, did tomatoes 3 years ago. He used to cultivate 20 hectares of tomato. But you have 70% post-harvest losses. So guess what? The year after COVID, he only did 15. As of last year, he's only doing 5. So the honest truth here is that you're not going to say that, yes, there's banditry displacing farmers. However, farmers are highly discouraged at the rural level because infrastructure for processing, storage, and guaranteeing offtake is non-existent. You're not going to tell me that I would be taking my family, toiling the land, farming the land, and then experiencing losses, and you think that I will not, economically speaking, pivot to other areas to earn a living. Wow. The honest truth is, right now, we're at a precipice, and this precipice demands that a Marshall Plan for agriculture across all agricultural value chain, that is meat, eggs, fish.
Rice.
That's a category.
Okay.
Meat, eggs, fish, fruits and vegetables, staple crops, cash crops. A strategy has to be built across so that every single Nigerian that wants to participate in the agri value chain, let me tell you in summary, or in kind of summary, when a country devalues its currency, no other sector of the economy can salvage a country apart from its people and its agriculture. What I mean by people is, you can sit down now, people can jabba is export because they do remittances back to their family. You can do fashion, you can do entertainment, you can do culture. It's people. However, your natural resources as ordained by God, which is your agric and your mining, are the two things that you have within your ecosystem. And the only way you can get full gains on this is to, one, you're going to organize your people to produce something. Then you have to educate them on how you produce it better, and you guarantee their offtake. If you can have a Marshall Plan that dictates what I just said, yes, Nigerians might feel it in the next 6 months, 7 months at its peak. But if this is done, even international investors that have seen a clearly laid out plan for what you want to do across these three categories will bring their investment into investing.
Okay.
It's plenty.
It's plenty. Yeah. Wilson, just as we come to the end, because I'm looking at the time now, we have about 5 minutes to the end of this program. What is the role of states in all of this? Aminu has spoken his mind and said that we need a Marshall Plan across all the crops that we are blessed across. He talked about being the highest producer of cassava. We're also the highest producer of yam, yet you'll be seeing Ghana yam abroad and all of that. So if we take specific crops, we can actually be net producers and also net exporters of these crops. What should the states do? What should the states do for this? Because so much attention is on the central. Now, President Tinubu is doing his. Vis-a-vis that the states are getting more money from FAC because of petrol subsidy removal. But there's still subsidy. That's another issue for another day. Wilson, we should not go into that. But they've been, in the last, from July of 2023 to December 2023, both states and local governments and FG have shared 3.3 trillion naira. So they have more nairas. What should be their involvement at this time?
I think, in terms of the role of state, I think their role is really critical as far as, building industries is concerned, developing value chains, because, again, people reside in the states. And we've seen that, many of these states have, incomes, their revenue has gone up significantly with FX and subsidy reforms. But I still don't think we're shining much light on them. Issues relating to how their resources are being allocated, in terms of even budgeting, where is the money going to, what areas are these monies going to, quarterly audits, in terms of what we see at the federal government level, where you have budget implementation reports and all of that. At the state level, it's very, very difficult to even get information as to where all of these resources are going to. So that's even one area that we need to even ask them more, as to, where are these monies going to. The other is in terms of, how they're able to support local businesses. Land issues, land tenures and co are very key as far as agriculture is concerned. What are they doing in terms of supporting local farmers? My colleague there, mentioned that, devaluation is actually an incentive for businesses to export to other countries. And whilst I spoke to a few, agri-business owners, in operating across the Ogun State and different parts of Nigeria, some of them, in fact, one said that she even was surprised to see that her goods reached Russia. She sells spices and many other agricultural items. She was quite, impressed that even as far as Russia, she could get her goods, were on the shelves. But one of the key problems that she also mentioned was that she's gaining a lot from exporting to other countries, but at the same time, because of the FX issues, she's also not really, there are issues with, being able to procure FX at, a very expensive rate. So that in itself erodes the gains that she's making. And then other issues relating to ease of doing business, which again, is not just a federal thing. State government role in terms of taxes, for instance, all of the multiple taxes that businesses pay, I see the interesting work that the policy committee is doing on tax, but I think that a lot, resides within the state to determine, how to harmonize all of these taxes. To say that why can't businesses in Nigeria just pay 1 or 2 taxes, and then how it's shared between the state government, local government, and within those agencies is then decided by the state, rather than imposing so many taxes and levies and duties on businesses, even small businesses that are thinking of or struggling to survive.
Okay, so Wilson. Wilson, I think we'll anchor on this, your point. I just have 30 seconds. Aminu, what do you think of the commodity board that the federal government says is want to establish? In just 30 seconds with you.
I think it's important to have a commodities board because of the guarantee offtake that I mentioned, but I think you cannot use the model of 30 years ago. Commodities boards have been digitized, they've been fully backed by technology, and that allows to give you the transparency, accountability that is required for those commodities boards to work. If you use the previous model, we'll go back to where we were.
Thank you. I like that you said that, so that we don't do it the way we used to do it before.
It won't work if you do it that way.
Thank you very much,
Thank you so
gentlemen.
much.
I've been speaking with Aminu Motalanyako, the MD CEO of
Sebore
International Farms. He's joined me here in the studio. And Wilson Erumebo, Senior Economist at Nigerian Economic Summit Group from London. Thank you very much, Wilson. Thank you for sacrificing your lecture today to speak with me. Thank you very much. See you soon. And that's it on today's edition of the program. The cost of living crisis, we looked at it from the food angle and, of course, the macroeconomic fundamentals. I'll see you all again next time. Be the best you can be and be the change that you want to see. I am Nancy Naji.